A young man, exhausted and delirious, washes up on a beach, looking up momentarily to see two young children, Claire Gear and Magnus Nolan, playing in the sand before he passes out. An armed guard, Tohoru Masamune, discovers him and has him brought to a large, seaside palace where the proprietor, an elderly Japanese man, is told of the stranger's arrival. The only objects found on him were a handgun and a brass allows the stranger entry. He is dragged in and given some food which he struggles to eat as the old man picks up the brass top and says, "You remind me of someone." Dom Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his accomplice, Arthur, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, address a planned client, Saito, Ken Watanabe, in a frightfully comparative lounge area about the administrations they give. Explicitly security against criminals worked. Dom Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his accomplice, Arthur, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, address a planned client, Saito, Ken Watanabe, in a frightfully comparative lounge area about the administrations they give. Explicitly security against criminals worked. Safeguard against extractors to safeguard anything mysteries he might stow away. He backs up his case by uncovering that he is the most gifted extractor there is and realizes every one of the stunts in question. Seeming doubtful, Saito stands to leave, telling Cobb he will think about his rectum shakes. They stroll to an external overhang where other party participants blend and Arthur focuses to approaches the one who inquires as to whether he misses her. He answers that he really does yet can't confide in her and inquires as to whether the youngsters miss her. Cobb stops a second prior to saying, "I can't envision." He then repulses through the window to an edge beneath, almost falling when Mal leaves her seat. He breaks into the room underneath and gets to the safe, trading out the manila envelope inside for another. As the lights in the room turn on, he turns with his firearm out to see Mal pointing a weapon at him and remaining next to Saito and a watchman holding Arthur. Cobb inquires as to whether she told him, as he slides his weapon across the table, that you are here to take from me, or that we are snoozing. This validates. Them three are connected to a PASIV, versatile mechanized somnocin intravenous gadget which takes care of them the rest drug somnocin, keeping them generally
snooze. He really takes a look at Saito, dozing on a bed, prior to going into one more space to keep an eye on Arthur and Cobb, both sleeping. Cobb's seat sits over a tub loaded with water. Blasts and yells outside draw nearer as a crowd of agitators drops down the road.
Affirming that his manager, Cobalt Designing, will not acknowledge disappointment, Cobb tosses Saito on the floor and requests that he let them know what they need to realize. In this way, he reaches the resolution that he is as yet dozing. Sufficiently sure, Saito, Arthur, Nash, and Cobb are sleeping in the vehicle of a train, watched over by a young fellow named Tadashi, Tylee Lee, who screens the time staying on the pace of gadget. He puts earphones over Nash's ears and plays music as a sign that there's no time to spare. The music plays faintly inside the fantasy, however sufficient that Nash can hear it. As the revolting crowd outside moves closer, Saito lauds Cobb on making a fantasy inside a fantasy, however ends up being befuddled at his failure to control this fantasy. Nash uncovers that they're not in that frame of mind in his. The horde gets through the entryway, going after everybody in the room, and Arthur, Nash, and Cobb awaken on the train. Cobb criticizes Nash, the planner of the fantasy, for planning the rug wrong and tosses Tadashi a chunk of change prior to leaving, telling them survival of the fittest. Saito gets up minutes after the fact to find.
Cobb turns his metal top and takes his firearm, pointing it at his sanctuary as the top twists. They ask while he's getting back home and he answers that he can't in view of work. At the point when James inquires as to whether their mom is with him, a picture of Ma enters his thoughts. Arthur thumps on the entryway and tells Cobb their ride is on the rooftop. Cobb chooses to travel to Buenos Aires to keep out of sight in lieu of their bombed work for Cobalt while Arthur says he's returning stateside. Cobb requests that he send his views as they make the way for the helicopter and see Nash, beaten and wounded, and Saito hanging tight for them. Evidently, Nash had attempted to sell out Cobb and Arthur for his own security, yet Saito has different interests. He extends to Cobb an employment opportunity performing commencement for him, something Arthur claims is unthinkable. Cobb, in any case, says that it's certainly feasible yet very troublesome since it includes making someone think about a thought as opposed to extricating one. He dismisses, demanding that he'll figure out how to determine relations with Cobalt himself. Yet Saito then inquires as to whether he needs to return home to his youngsters in America. He guarantees Cobb that, on the off chance that he succeeds, should simply settle on a telephone decision and the charges keeping. They board the helicopter with Saito while two hooligans divert Nash to a dubious destiny. On the way, Arthur clears up for Saito the idea of commencement, letting him know that just making someone think about a thought doesn't ensure that the thought will take. Cobb goes to Paris where he gets together with his father by marriage, Miles, Michael Caine, a teacher at a college and the person who showed Cobb and Mal dream sharing and planning dreams. Cobb requests a draftsman, one comparable to he, and Miles guides him towards somebody better. He acquaints Cobb with an alumni understudy of his, Ariadne, Elliot Page, who is promptly scrutinized by Cobb to plan a labyrinth that requires one profession and what is expected of her. Her occupation as modeler will be to configuration dreams and make virtual labyrinths for the visionaries subliminal. Ariadne mindful that they are in a fantasy. The acknowledgement makes Ariadne alarm and the fantasy brutally falls. At the point when they conscious, Ariadne finds they are in Cobb's stockroom studio where Arthur is checking them. Ariadne shows shock when Arthur says they'd been under just 5 minutes when it seemed like hours. Cobb makes sense of that the psyche works quicker in a fantasy, so time moves more slow. Once more, they go under and Ariadne is offered the chance to modify the material science of the fantasy inventively. Her structural marvels cause individuals in the fantasy, projections of Cobb's psyche, to look for the gatecrasher, Ariadne, like white platelets attracted to an infection. At the point when Ariadne tragically is a horde, isolating Ariadne from Cobb until Mal shows up and wounds her. She awakens and Cobb races to the bathroom while Arthur makes sense of that Cobb's inner mind became mindful of her as an obtrusive being and she couldn't awaken immediately on the grounds that there was still time at work. The main way for her to awaken was on the off chance that she passed on. Cobb takes out his top and twists it, moaning as it overturns. Ariadne leaves the distribution center, furious and declining to open her brain to Cobb in the event that Cobb gets back to the room and guarantees Arthur that she'll be back. However, he really wants to make an outing to Mombasa to select a close buddy to the group. He tracks down Eames, Tom Solid, betting at a bar and offers him a put in his group as a falsifier/imitator. Eames concurs prior to telling Cobb he is being followed, highlighting 2 men at the bar. Cobb remembers them as Cobalt hooligans who should expect to gather the abundance on his head for them in a limousine and gets first Cobb, then Eames. He clears up that he has been following Cobb for safeguard his venture. Eames takes them to a neighborhood scientific expert he realizes who tries different things with Sam Nassan and who may be a resource for their group. Yusuf, Dilip Rao, tunes in as Cobb makes sense of that his occupation might require the utilization of a 3-layered dream. Yusuf says that this would be generally inconceivable, because of the shakiness of dreams the further down you go, notwithstanding an exceptional arrangement he has devised with a strong narcotic. To show its adequacy, Yusuf takes them first floor where they see Cobb know that these men come here to awaken. Dreaming has turned into their world. Their rest is profound and stable and they can dream for what feels to them like he and waking from a striking dream with Mal. He persuades Yusuf to join. The group groups together and concludes that they will make a 3-level dream with the 3rd level containing the established thought. The objective as a top priority is Robert Fisher, Cillian Murphy, the chief and main successor to Fisher Morrow, whose dad, Maurice, Pete Postlethwaite, is gradually rotting as is on Robert's guardian and colleague. The objective as a top priority is Robert Fisher, Cillian Murphy, the chief and main successor to Fisher Morrow, whose dad, Maurice, Pete Postlethwaite, is gradually rotting with sickness. Over the course of the following couple of weeks, Arthur shows Ariadne the meaning of emblems, little, individual items that empower an individual to separate among dreams and reality. Cobb's symbol is his to guarantee its legitimacy. She makes a semi-amped needing however much time as could be expected to finish the task. The group chooses, with Saito's assistance, that they will play out the gig on a Boeing 747 during a global departure from Europe to Los Angeles, a 10-hour flight. Together, the group plummets into, first, Yusuf's fantasy. It is pouring vigorously in New York City as individuals from the group are gotten. Arthur and Saito seize a taxi, get Robert and Eames and afterward Yusuf as Saito holds a firearm to Robert as a component of the grab trick. Cobb and Ariadne continue in a different vehicle until a train unexpectedly barges down the center of the road, hitting their vehicle and briefly slowing down them. Gunfire then, At that point, opens in the taxi and the group is compelled to take prompt hesitant moves, hanging out in a distribution center where it's found that Saito has been shot in the. Robert is taken into one more space while Saito is laid on a table. Before Eames can shoot him to end his wretchedness and wake him up, Cobb stops him and makes sense of that. Because of the narcotics they've taken, Ariadne stands up to Cobb about the control he has over his own inner mind, and he admits that he can't keep Mal somewhere far away from me. He tells her that they had been exploring different avenues regarding dream states and needed to find out how far down they could turn out into their inner mind. They ended up in an in-between state together, unfit to leave due to the time staying on their pace of clock. They reproduced their lives, going through years' worth of building. After so lengthy, they started to see limbo as their world. After something like 50 years, withstanding getting back to this present reality, Mal kept on accepting that she was all the while dreaming and accepted that perishing was the best way to awaken. However, she would not leave without Cobb. She cherished him to an extreme. On their wedding commemoration, Cobb went to the lodging they generally remained in to find it destroyed and the window open. Outside, on a contrary edge, sat Mal, who uncovered to Cobb that she documented a letter to their lawyer communicating a trepidation for her life, really outlining him in case of her passing and exceptional proof against him. With no other decision, Cobb abandons his kids with their grandma and escapes the country. Ariadne attempts to persuade Cobb that Mal's passing was not his shortcoming and that he really wants to zero in on the mission. Eames plans himself as a pantomime of searing while Cobb and Arthur grill Robert, requesting to know the blend to his da. They pressure Robert by involving sautéing as influence. Eames yells from one more space as though being beaten before he is carried into the room with Robert to attempt to inspire him to recall. With the distribution center at risk for being invaded, the group pressure Robert by and by for a blend. They all get in and get ready to enter the second level of the fantasy while Yusuf drives the van away from the seeking after projections.
In Arthur's fantasy, Cobb takes steps to utilize Mr. Charles's, a technique wherein he acquaints the subject with the way that he's dreaming to gather trust. He meets Robert at a bar and lets him know that he is there to safeguard him and somebody is attempting to get to his brain. He persuades Robert that he's dreaming by presenting the oddness of their environmental factors and quiets Robert to control them. He assists Robert with recollecting that he's been captured, and drives him to a lodging, the initial not many quantities of which match the main digits Robert considered for the blend, where the remainder of the group refocuses. Saito is in better well-being in this level of the fantasy, yet before long starts. The third dream is set in snow-covered mountains where Robert's protected is vigorously monitored in a mountainside post. The group separates to draw the watchman away. Cobb goes with Ariadne, Eames travels solo to avert the gatekeepers, and Robert. In the interim, Yusuf quickly fails to keep a grip on the van and it tumbles down a slope. The tumbling impact converts into Arthur's fantasy as he wards off Robert's projections, the climate around him turning as gravity switches, and afterward. As Yusuf keeps driving, he becomes cornered on a raised extension with one vehicle brimming with projections stayed with him. Yusuf plays music through Arthur's earphones to caution him of the approaching dismiss prior to driving in reverse from the. The effect likewise converts into the third level of the fantasy. Saito and Robert look into the mountainside and are compelled to cut their lines as a torrential slide clears downward on them. With brief period left, Cobb requests to be aware, assuming that there is one more way into the post, and Ariadne yields into confessing to him of a mystery underground entry that Robert. Saito is passed on to set down, hacking blood as Robert moves ahead. In any case, as Robert comes into Cobb's view, so does someone else. Mal drops in from the roof and shoots Robert down before Cobb wakes up and shoots her. Eames is requested to the room as Cobb and Ariadne race to the site. Finding Robert dead, Cobb names the mission a disappointment, since, in the meantime, is to integrate the group and carries them into the lift. He lines the beyond the. In an in-between state, Cobb and Ariadne visit the weakening scene that he and Mal once assembled. They see old homes and structures before they find the one where Cobb knows Mal should be. On the off chance that they find Mal, they'll find Robert in light of the fact that Mal will need to utilize something Cobb needs to carry him to her. Adequately sure, they enter the condo and Mal is sitting tight for them. Once more, she attempts to persuade Cobb that his place is with her in their genuine home with their youngsters, yet Cobb uncovers a horrendous truth. The justification for why Mal accepted that her fantasies were genuine. Cobb broke into her safe and turned the top to persuade her that this world was not genuine. In any case, he didn't have the foggiest idea about that. When they truly awakened, she would keep on trusting that. This was the means by which he realized commencement would work, since he performed it on Mal first, and his culpability over her ensuing passing has been tormenting him from that point forward. Robert reawakens in Dream Level 3 with Eames' guide and opens his own protected, finding inside a picture of his bed-stricken dad mumbling his final word. Robert recognizes that his dad, Will, and a paper fan his dad made for him once as a kid. Mournfully, Robert admires his dad has passed and separates as the van raises a ruckus around town. In an in-between state, the synchronization of kicks pulls on Ariadne and she calls for Cobb to join her. Cobb says that he will remain in an in-between state, yet not with Mal. At this point, Saito has passed on and joined Limbo 2. Cobb should track down him, however vows to return. Ariadne jumps off the side of the structure and rides the kicks back to Dream 1. In the van, Robert awakens and gets away from the lowered van with searing. Arthur and Ariadne share an oxygen tank with Yusuf before they get away from the van, leaving Cobb. Robert and sautéing come to shore, where Robert uncovers that his dad truly maintained that him should be his own man and that he will do precisely. In an in-between state, Cobb washes shorewards where the outfitted gatekeeper tracks down him. He is brought to the coastline royal residence where the older Japanese man perceives his metal top. Cobb awakens on the plane and glances around, surprised, to see Arthur and Ariadne grinning at him. He takes a gander at the now conscious Saito, who picked up his telephone and dials